777. And Lisa Maxfield here for Ms. Brophy. My bar number is 844-337. My last name is spelled Maxfield.
All right, give me just one moment to get set up here and we'll get underway. Having a little bit of difficulty here. This may take just a second. Yeah, why don't we go off the record for just a moment?
I was just trying to figure it out.
We're already off, so give me just a second.
It's doing something odd.
There was some issues with connection to the network. Do you?
Yeah.
Give me a second, Judge. Let me go ahead and mute the board.
All right, we're back on the record. My apologies for the delay. Before we bring in the jury, I did want to rule on a motion that I took under advisement on Friday I heard several motions that day, but the one that I had not ruled on concerned a blog post that the defendant wrote 11 years ago called How to Murder Your Husband. And we had heard testimony that the blog post had been written for a writer's workshop. Now, defense moved to exclude the blog post, and having fully considered the matter, I am going to grant the defense motion to the extent that the evidence is potentially admissible under Oregon Evidence Code 4043 as relevant for a non-propensity purpose to show the defendant's knowledge. I don't believe it survives the balancing test the court's required to undergo under Oregon Evidence Code 403. Any minimal probative value of an article written that long ago is substantially outweighed by the danger of unfair prejudice and confusion of the issues. So with that, unless there's anything that either side wants to put on the record, we can bring the jury in.
Your Honor, I think both sides need to request to admit some exhibits that will
Okay.
be planned to be used in opening.
All right. Does the state want to start?
I do, Your Honor. And I have a longer list, some of which we're planning to use in opening and some of which the parties have agreed to. Would you prefer if I just go through them slowly? I'll go in order. They'll be found on the exhibit list that I've provided, and I can give document category headings as well, if that's helpful.
I think I have a list here that shows exhibits 4 through 100 and something. So why don't we do it by just numerically?
All right. First, the state is moving to introduce and offer State's Exhibit 4 titled OCI Opening Walkthrough Video.
All right. And I guess I should ask, are there any objections to these exhibits?
I don't believe so, but I'll go slow in case there's something that we missed.
Sure. If I don't hear an objection, I'll say it's admitted. So exhibit 4 is admitted.
State's Exhibit 7 video, it's Goose Hollow Video 1.
The west pedestrian crossing.
Correct.
And Your Honor, I think our agreement about those is that they can be pre-admitted, but the discussion will be limited to not specify time frame because there's some discrepancy in the timestamps, and so we'll work that out during trial. But the video itself is fine.
Okay. Exhibit 7 will be admitted.
And the next 3 have that same stipulation with them. The next is State's Exhibit 8, Goose Hollow Video 2, Goose 03 westbound platform.
All right, that'll be admitted with the same stipulation.
And State's Exhibit 9, Bellagio's Video Cam 5, same stipulation.
That'll be admitted.
And Exhibit 14, Affinity Video Back Parking, same stipulation.
Okay, exhibit 14 will be admitted.
All right, and then State's Exhibit 23, which is under subheading 911 calls, and it's 911 call by Kathleen Dooley.
All right, exhibit 23 will be admitted.
And then now I'm jumping to photographs. State's Exhibit 28, which is labeled Photo of 17th and Jefferson facing OCI, Photo 1.
All right, state's exhibit 28 will be admitted.
29, same title, but Photo 2.
Exhibit 29 will be admitted.
State's Exhibit 32, Photo of OCI Interior, Kitchen 1.
32 will be admitted.
Photo 61, or State's Exhibit 61, excuse me, photo of Dan Brophy's phone.
61 will be admitted.
64, photo of open ghost gun kit.
64 will be admitted.
65, screen capture of ghost gun website.
65 will be admitted.
66, screen capture of Caroline Colt Company eBay listing.
66 will be admitted.
Jumping down to 112 in photographs, Glock 17 gun show gun open box.
All right, that'll be admitted as well.
115 under photographs, defendant's van and driveway, scratch, hyphen scratch.
Okay, that'll, I just want to make sure I'm following. When you say item scratch, you are moving to admit the exhibit, right?
Yes.
All right, 115 will be
That's the
admitted.
title of the, thank you.
Yeah.
All right, then I'm jumping to category of other documents. And State's Exhibit 70, American Amicable Life Insurance Policy.
That'll be admitted.
71, Americo Life Insurance Policy.
That'll be admitted.
72, Fidelity Guarantee Life Insurance Policy.
That'll be admitted.
73, Foresters Financial Universal Life Policy.
73 will be admitted.
74, Life Map Basic Group Life Insurance Policy.
74 will be admitted.
75, Lincoln Financial Life Insurance Policy.
75 will be admitted.
76, Mutual of Omaha Life Insurance Policy.
76 will be admitted.
77, Seller's Net Sheet.
77 will be admitted.
84, Bank of America Records.
84 will be admitted.
85, Wells Fargo Bank Records.
85 will be admitted.
86, On Point Bank Records.
86 will be admitted.
I'm jumping now to category other. 95, which is a board map of the area surrounding OCI.
95 will be admitted.
Those are here in the courtroom. 96, a board map of video locations.
A 96 will be admitted.
99, AT&T cell site location records.
99 will be admitted.
102, cell site 10-mile range of Wolf Creek Range.
102 will be admitted.
And then two more under audio category. State's Exhibit 3A, audio of death notification.
3A will be admitted.
And 109, phone call from defendant to Darren Posey.
All right, 109 will be admitted as well.
And that's all I have, thank you.
All right, and I wasn't sure, based on that, is the defense also moving to admit certain exhibits?
We are, Your Honor, and I believe we have agreement as to all of these. 201 is an Alaris check.
All right, 201 will be admitted. And I should ask, does defense have a list of the?
Your Honor, we don't.
Okay.
We provided all of these exhibits to them unnumbered, and I'm really just assigning numbers now, and we will follow up with that.
All right,
202 is a photo of Dan, Nancy, and Addie.
all right, 202 will be admitted.
We have an agreement as to 203, which the court will recall it previously excluded, the Dearest Dan letter.
Oh, okay, so there's an agreement that that's admissible. I just want to make sure.
That's correct, Your Honor.
Okay, so 203 will be admitted, and just so does 203 include the attachments to the letter?
Yes.
Okay, all right.
204 is an aerial view of the Brophy property, a Google aerial view.
All right, that'll be admitted.
205 is a property research report, essentially a title report on the property.
Okay, 205 will be admitted.
206 is an excerpt from a report prepared by OSP criminalist Leland Samuelson.
206 will be admitted.
207 is a voicemail that was found on Mr. Brophy's telephone.
Okay, 207 will be admitted.
208 are a series of chat messages, four excerpts from a long text thread between the Brophies, between Dan Brophy and Mrs. Brophy. And we've agreed to those specific excerpts.
Okay, 208's admitted.
209 is an email that our client received shortly before her husband died. called Witches, a Love Story was the subject of the email.
209 will be admitted.
And then there are three New York Times articles that we'll display to the jury, but we're not really asking to be pre-admitted. They're just part of the opening.
Okay, they're just demonstrative aid.
Right.
Okay.
And I think that is it. Am I missing anything?
We'll find out.
I think that's it, Your Honor.
All right, and also just so everyone is aware logistically, at least a couple of the jurors have expressed that they may need more frequent comfort breaks than others, so I will bring that up with them, but I just want to let everyone know. So I think we are ready for the jury.
And Your Honor, I should note, we do have a number of other stipulations that we have memorialized, and we need to get in a nice enough form that we can put in the court record, but this is not the extent of our stipulations.
Okay, and do you want to take that up later then?
Well, but Ms. Loeb is responsible for printing it, I think, so I'll let her speak to
Yes, I
timing.
think so.
For printing it?
Yeah,
Okay,
think
we'll get it in a
afterwards.
better format, I think.
okay, that's
Fine.
fine.
You ready for the jury?
We're ready for the jury, and then we will give them the
Remain
oath.
on the record while I get the jury, or we can go off?
No, we can go off the record, and I want to tell you.
Just a second, we go off record and mute the courtroom while we're in recess. For those on WebEx, we're muting the courtroom during recess and we'll be resuming in just another minute. We'll go back on the record, Judge.
Everyone else can go ahead and have a seat. Now that you're comfortable, we're actually going to have the jurors stand back up so we can give you an oath.
All right, I'll have you all please raise your right hand. Do each of you solemnly swear and affirm that you will truthfully try this case and render a true verdict according to the law and evidence as presented to you? Be seated.
All right, I want to first just start and make sure the jurors can all hear me. If you can hear me, raise your hand. And it looks like everyone. Okay, so you may notice that a typical trial jury consists of 12 jurors that deliberate at the end of the trial to reach a verdict. It is common, however, to have what are known as alternate jurors. Now, the role of the alternate juror is to function just as regular jurors do. You'll be present throughout the duration of the trial, but are excused just before the deliberations begin. Now, we are fully aware that that can be frustrating for those of you who are ultimately chosen to be alternates, but you serve as an important safety measure in the event that unforeseen circumstances prevent regular jurors from completing the trial. Make no assumptions at all as to whether you are an alternate or a regular juror based on where you are seated. We've used a randomized seating chart to place you in your spots. Listen to all the evidence, but understand that alternates are excused prior to you sit here throughout the whole thing except for when they go back to deliberate. But even at that point, you're not totally excused. It's always possible that during deliberations, a juror may become unavailable and that we would have to call one of the alternates back. So if you are ultimately an alternate on this trial, you'll still be under the prohibition of discussing the case with anyone or looking up anything until the trial is completely concluded. Now, given the length of the trial, I also want to mention that we do typically take 2 comfort breaks throughout the day. We're getting a late start today. Normally it's around 10:15 or 10:30. We take the first one. I don't know that we'll do that today given the late start, but at any time, if someone is uncomfortable and needs to use the restroom, they shouldn't feel embarrassed at all just by raising their hand and letting us know. Attorneys do it, sometimes I do it, so let us know if there's an issue because we want to make sure everyone is giving the trial their full attention. Now, trials have several stages. I'm going to briefly describe the remaining stages of this trial. This is the preliminary instruction phase where I give you some of the instructions that you'll follow during the trial. And then next will be the opening statements where the attorneys summarize what they expect the evidence to be. Then we'll have the presentation of the evidence where witnesses and exhibits are presented to you. After all that, we'll have jury instructions where I explain the law that applies to the charge in this case. This includes explaining what the state must prove beyond a reasonable doubt for a guilty verdict. And we will have printed copy of the instructions for you to refer to during deliberations. After that, the attorneys will give their closing arguments, and that's where they have an opportunity to persuade you on how to decide the case. After they've made their closing arguments, we'll excuse the alternates, but again, under the same prohibitions until the trial is completely done. The remaining jurors will go into deliberations where they go back into the jury room and decide whether the defendant is guilty or not guilty. And then lastly, the jury returns its verdict. We'll discuss how that's done a little later in the trial. Now, I do want to start by explaining a bit about what is and what is not evidence in a case, because it's extremely important that you consider only the evidence in deciding the facts. Now, as I've said before, don't allow any personal feelings, sympathy, prejudice, or bias, whether conscious or unconscious, to influence your decision making. You must not be biased in favor of or against any party, witness, or lawyer because of their disability, gender, gender identity, race, religion, ethnicity, sexual orientation, age, national origin, or socioeconomic status. As we've discussed before, you were shown a video on unconscious bias, and that's a term used by social scientists to describe the reality that everyone, myself included, has feelings, assumptions, perceptions, fears, and stereotypes. That is, unconscious biases that we may not be aware of. These hidden thoughts can affect what we see and hear, how we remember what we see and hear, how we interact with others, and how we make important decisions. Our biases can affect how we act, favorably or unfavorably, towards someone, and you must make every effort to be aware of these biases and what effect they may have on your decision making. Now, as a judge, my role is to be a gatekeeper regarding the evidence. I determine what the law allows to be evidence. In effect, the law considers anything that isn't evidence to be unreliable, and that's why you must not consider non-evidence in deciding the facts. However, the law does not conclude that anything that is evidence is necessarily reliable. Determining the reliability or believability of evidence is ultimately your responsibility. You must decide what evidence is believable and how believable or persuasive any particular piece of evidence is. So while you're not allowed to consider anything that isn't evidence in deciding the facts, you are free to decide how believable or unbelievable, important or unimportant any particular piece of evidence is in deciding the facts. Evidence consists of testimony, of witnesses and exhibits that are admitted into evidence. Testimony is what a witness who is sworn or affirmed to answer questions truthfully says while being examined as a witness, and it'll be very easy to know when they're testifying because they'll be up here in this area. Exhibits are physical objects such as photographs, charts, and letters. You'll be able to examine admitted exhibits during your deliberations, and you may draw reasonable inferences from the evidence, but do not guess or speculate. In understanding what is evidence, it's helpful to have some examples of what is not evidence. The fact that a criminal charge has been filed against the defendant is not evidence. Any defendant is innocent of any crime unless and until the state proves their guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. Questions from lawyers, and other non-witnesses for that matter, are not evidence. So whenever I sustain an objection to a question, don't speculate about why the question was asked or what the answer would have been. Now, this is a subtle but important point because it differs from our daily lives. In our everyday lives, if a friend asks us if we've seen a mutual friend's new car, we infer from the question that the mutual friend in fact has a new car, but we don't make the same assumption in trials. The person asking the question is not a witness and is not subject to the safeguards that the law requires before you may consider the person's words as evidence. So in court, you're not allowed to consider questions asked by attorneys or anyone else in determining what the facts are. Those questions are not evidence. So of course, when a witness asks a question, you can consider the answer in the context of the question. And just to give a concrete example, if a lawyer were to ask what color was Bob's new car, and the witness answers green, you can take that answer as agreeing that Bob in fact has a new car and that its color is green. However, if the witness answers Bob doesn't have a new car, you may not take the question as evidence that Bob in fact actually did have one. So I know that may be a little convoluted. Does everyone feel like they understand that? All right, I see nodding heads. Now, from time to time, a lawyer may object to something that's offered into evidence, and then I'll need to decide whether the objected to material will be admitted. If I overrule the objection, the material, for example, an exhibit or a witness's answer, becomes evidence. If I sustain the objection, the exhibit is not admitted and is not evidence, or the witness is not allowed to answer the question. Now, frequently, witnesses will start to answer questions before I've had a chance to rule. And so if that happens and I ultimately sustain an objection to the question, you have to disregard the response that they've made because their response is not evidence. Now, occasionally, I may decide that something that has been admitted into evidence should not have been. If that happens, I'll instruct you to disregard the exhibit or testimony that should not have been admitted, which means it's no longer evidence, and you can't consider it in any way. You must treat it as if the question had not been answered or the exhibit had not been received in the first place. Now, you must not interpret any statement, ruling, or remark that I make during this trial as any indication that I've formed any opinion about the facts or outcome of this case. You and you alone are to decide the facts. You must decide how believable the evidence is and what weight or value you'll give that evidence. Now, you may take notes if you wish during the trial. However, please keep in mind that each party is entitled to the considered decision of each juror. So some people, it works really well for them to take notes. They're able to do that and pay attention, and others feel like if I take notes, I can't really pay attention. It's completely up to you. I do want to ask, do they have their notepads yet? They do, okay. You are going to see me up here. I have these computer monitors, and you will see me typing away from time to time. I just want everyone to understand that when you see me doing that, I'm taking notes. I'm not doing anything unrelated to the trial itself. Now, during deliberations, you shouldn't give undue weight to another juror's notes if those notes conflict with your own or your recollection of the evidence. Don't allow your note-taking to interfere with your ability to observe and evaluate testimony. Now, your notes can only be in two places, either here in the courtroom in your chair when you leave or in the jury room. You can't take the notes with you when you go to lunch or overnight breaks, for example. My staff will make sure the notes are safe and that no one has access to them during your absence. Now, don't discuss this case during the trial with anyone, including any of the lawyers, parties, witnesses, your friends, members of the family, the media. Don't communicate with anyone by any means, such as telephone, text message, email, etc., all the things that we've talked about before. And don't discuss the case with each other, the other jurors, or look at their notes until you begin your deliberations at the end of the case after you've heard all the evidence and the argument of the lawyers have been instructed on the law that applies to the case. Each of you must keep an open mind throughout the trial and must not attempt to decide the case until you begin your deliberations. And don't make any independent personal investigation in any facts or locations connected with the case. I think we've gone over this a multitude of times, so I won't say the entire thing again, but just keep in mind that you can't read any news stories or go on the computer or communicate with anyone about what you see or hear in the courtroom or try to find out more about the case. You can only decide the case on what happens here in open court, where both the state and the defense are aware of and have had the opportunity to question the source of the evidence and to address any legal issues that may arise. It's the only fair way to decide a case. If you do base your verdict on anything other than what you've learned in this courtroom, that could be grounds for what's called a mistrial, which means all of the work that's been done up to this point is essentially thrown out the window. We have to start the whole process over again. That's why it's so important, and that's why I've emphasized it so many times as we've talked. Also, ignore any attempted improper communication. If someone tries to communicate with you about the case, tell them you can't discuss it because you're a juror. If they persist, simply walk away and report the incident to the court. You can't talk to anyone about the case, even those closest to you, except to say that you're a juror on a criminal case and Judge Rammers says you cannot talk about it. Now, after you've rendered your verdict or have been otherwise discharged by me, you'll be free to do any research you choose or to share your experience with anyone you choose, either directly or through your favorite electronic means. And again, remember that all non-medical electronic devices are to be turned off during the trial. You could only use those during breaks. Now, I'm sure you've all noticed that while most buildings no longer enforce the wearing of masks in Oregon, we're continuing to do so in the courthouse for the time being. Now, during the trial, there will be a few exceptions to this. The attorneys will remove their masks when they're presenting their opening and closing statements, and the defendant, Ms. Brophy, is not required to wear a mask. Lastly, witnesses will remove their masks when they testify, but the rest of us will wear masks. So we'll now hear the opening statements in which the lawyers will outline the evidence as they expect it to be, and after the opening statements, the evidence will be presented. At the end of the trial, you will have to make your decision based on what you recall of the evidence. You'll not have a written transcript to consult. I want to be very clear about that. And even though we are recording, it's very difficult to play back recorded testimony. So while I won't say it's never done, it's rarely done. I urge you to pay close attention to the testimony as it is given, and if at any time you can't hear a question or an answer, or you can't hear me, let me know immediately by raising your hand. In performing your role, you must of course be fair and impartial, and you must follow the law whether you agree with it completely or not. And you must not allow yourself to be influenced at all by personal feelings, sympathy for, or prejudice against anyone involved in the case. So with that, we'll turn to the state.
Your Honor, there is a short matter that the parties need to confer on
Okay.
before we get
Do
started.
we need a short break?
I think just a short break would be fine.
All right. And one thing I should have said too to the jury, just so you're not frustrated by this throughout the course of the trial, but there are often things that come up that we do need to discuss outside your presence. If nothing else, it gives you a chance to stretch your legs a little bit. So we'll have Ms. Lou take you back to the jury room, and why don't we leave it running so that no, go ahead. Let's go off. You're right. Yeah, let's go off record.
I just want to let you know that, we
Everyone can be seated. And Mr. Overstreet, when you're ready.
Dan Brophy met Nancy Crampton when Miss Crampton moved to Oregon and enrolled and attended the Culinary Institute in the early 90s. Dan Brophy was her instructor. The two started dating, and within a couple of years, and enough convincing by Miss Crampton, the two were married by 1999. They bought their first house in 1999, and they lived in their modest home in the suburb of Portland until Dan's death in June of 2018. Although Dan Brophy had a child, now an adult, from a previous marriage, Dan Brophy and now Nancy Brophy never had any children. They also did not have anyone in their lives when Dan died that depended on the Brophy's financially. Over the years, Nancy worked as a caterer. She sold life insurance and life insurance products, or other insurance products. But she also wrote romance novels. Nancy wrote and published several books over the years. None of them really led to much financial success. As time went by, Nancy seemed to focus more on selling insurance. While that's going on, Dan Brophy continued his employment at the Oregon Culinary Institute. He worked at other culinary schools over the years, but at the time of his death, he was working at the Oregon Culinary Institute. He was a lead chef instructor there, but he also had other employment at a care facility called Avamere, where he was a cook as a favor to a friend who needed some help in the kitchen. On the surface, the Brophies appeared to their friends and family to be a couple in love who were entering the next stage in life. After leading what Nancy would later tell detectives was a simple life. To Dan Brophy, that simple life was raising chickens and tending to a garden where he grew spices. And he would take these spices to school and sell them to his students for a pretty nominal price. Dan was content with Nancy running the household, as Dan Brophy would refer to Nancy as management, a role that Nancy Brophy gladly accepted. The financial struggles really began to develop in 2016 as the two struggled to pay their $1,530 mortgage starting in June of that year. At one point, they even drained their only retirement account, a 401k, that had about $35,000 in it. And they also took a $5,000 loan on a life insurance policy. They used that money to catch up on on the mortgage, to pay for home renovations, landscaping, pay the IRS, pay for some travel, housekeeping, storage, and Miss Brophy spent about $1,500 of that money on guns and gun parts. They were also spending well over $1,000 each month on life insurance premiums. Due to a pattern of overspending, they were on track again to be in financial despair within months. By late 2017, financial despair evident and no end in sight, as their mortgage just continued to rise due to a mortgage rate increase. Nancy started researching and planning the murder of Dan Brophy. Nancy started first by researching ghost guns online. Ghost guns are available for purchase online. They are marketed as unserialized, unregistered, and untraceable firearms. They sell them as a kit online. And what this kit is the lower frame of the gun that requires some knowledge and skill to be able to build it. However, the slide and barrel that comes with the ghost gun kit is fully intact and ready for use. Ms. Brophy visited the Ghost Guns website on November 27, 2017, and again on December 12, 2017. Then on Christmas Eve of 2017, Nancy Brophy, once again, while Dan Brophy was just getting off of work at Avamere, visited the Ghost Guns website. But this time she didn't just visit. This time she purchased a Glock 19 9mm ghost gun build kit. That build kit was delivered in early January 2018. And it was later found by police when they searched a storage unit rented by Nancy Brophy. When the police located it, it did not appear that Nancy Brophy ever built it. It became apparent that it required a level of skill to build that Nancy Brophy simply did not possess. By late January 2018, Nancy was once again searching for information regarding Glocks, including whether or not a Glock had a kickback when fired, as well as searching videos regarding Glock 19 ghost guns. Apparently unable to complete the build of the ghost gun kit, Nancy Brophy once again returned to her online research, where she searched for gun shops in the Portland area. And on February 15th, 2018, she was searching for a Portland Expo gun show. On February 17th, Nancy visited the Portland Expo gun show alone, while Dan Brophy was at work at the Culinary Institute. At the gun show, instead of a Glock 19 9mm like she had purchased from Ghost Guns, this time she purchased a completed Glock 17 9mm. And the seller gave Nancy Brophy written directions on the back of the receipt to a public gun range out off of Highway 26 towards the Oregon coast. 2 days later, forensic evidence will show that Nancy was again searching for a Glock 17 for sale online. That search took Nancy to eBay, where she set up an eBay account and started shopping for a Glock 17 slide and barrel. By February 23rd, Nancy had won an auction for a Glock 17 slide and barrel. That slide and barrel arrived at Nancy's home on February 28, 2018. Shortly after that, Nancy deleted her eBay account. Investigators determined that the slide and barrel that Nancy Brophy had purchased from eBay would fit perfectly on the lower frame of the gun that she had purchased from the gun show. You'll hear from forensic scientist Leland Samuelson in this case, who will tell you that the slide and barrel is what leaves what he will call tool marks on the shell casings when bullets are fired from a gun. And that it is the comparison of shell casings fired from the same slide and barrel that would result in a match. He will tell you that if you shoot a gun and then swap the slide and barrel, the shell casings markings would not be a match on a comparison. The evidence will show you that Nancy possibly attempted to use the ghost gun slide and barrel, intact ghost gun slide and barrel, to swap out with the gun show slide and barrel. And that she possibly just made a mistake. You see, the Glock 19 and the Glock 17, both 9mm firearms, look incredibly similar. In fact, the only difference in the two guns is that one of them has a slightly shorter barrel. By the time Nancy Brophy could have realized that she could not use the ghost gun slide and barrel on the gun show gun, she turned to the internet to find another slide and barrel that could replace the gun show gun slide and barrel. As I said, that eBay slide and barrel that she purchased would fit on the gun that she purchased from the gun show. And that eBay purchase, that slide and barrel that she purchased, that is the only firearm or firearm part that law enforcement did not uncover in this investigation, despite the fact that they executed search warrants on Nancy Brophy's home, her public storage unit, and the 2 pods that she rented for storage. Leland Samuelson will conclude that Nancy Brophy did not use the slide and barrel from the ghost gun in this homicide, nor did she use the slide and barrel that came with the gun that she purchased from the gun show. However, since law enforcement was unable to recover the slide and barrel that she purchased on eBay, Leland Samuelson is prevented from doing a comparison to that slide and barrel. Now by February 28th, once the eBay slide and barrel had arrived, Nancy had everything she needed at that point to carry out and conceal the murder, except the experience of shooting a firearm. After returning from a short trip in mid-March, Nancy got up on a Monday morning and started researching how to load a Glock 9mm. She found herself on YouTube that morning, with access to numerous videos instructing the viewer on how to load Glock 9mm. Later that same morning, after she was done with her research, Nancy's phone can then be tracked leaving her and Dan Brophy's home in Beaverton and heading westbound on Highway 26. Now, Nancy's phone in the past has made the same journey, as it appears that Nancy would frequent the Oregon coast. However, on March 26th, Nancy Brophy's phone does not go all the way to the coast. Instead, it stops somewhere along the way. And cell site evidence will show you that Nancy's phone was hitting off of a tower that serviced that same public shooting range that had been provided she had been provided directions by the gun broker from the gun show. Now, it doesn't appear that morning that she had much time to even shoot that morning before she had to return to Portland for lunch. However, Nancy returned to that same area the very next morning on March 27, 2018. And it appears that she did remain in the area long enough in order for somebody to fire a gun. You're going to hear about how this range is set up, how it's public and open, and that you simply just have to drive up a gravel road, park on the side, get out, and begin shooting downrange without any need to interact with anyone. Both of these trips that she took up there on the 26th and 27th were both done while Dan Brophy was at work at the Oregon Culinary Institute. Now by June 2nd, Nancy had purchased the necessary firearms and parts to carry out and conceal the murder, as well as now had an opportunity to practice with the gun and further educate herself online about the assembly, disassembly, and cleaning of a Glock. Nancy left her home early that Saturday morning on June 2nd, and is first seen on surveillance video downtown near the Oregon Culinary Institute at about 6:39 a.m. You'll see heading here eastbound on Jefferson, minivan being driven by Nancy Brophy. She is then seen on numerous cameras around the area of the Oregon Culinary Institute. You'll get to see all of those videos. She's seen on several of those videos until she's finally seen coming down Columbia, turning on to 17th at about 7:08. She's not seen again on camera until 7:28. I believe the evidence will show you that she remained within this area during that time, between 7:08 and 7:28. Otherwise, she would have been caught on the various other cameras leaving the area. Now at 7:20, we can see Dan Brophy coming into town near the Oregon Culinary Institute. And this is the view of that camera up this way at Jefferson. See a white pickup truck coming into frame. That is the white pickup truck being driven by Dan Brophy. Now he turns on the 20th or 19th and comes in to the Oregon Culinary Institute from that direction. Dan parks his truck on 17th Avenue, right near Jefferson, right in front of the Culinary Institute. You'll see his white pickup truck on the picture on the left. That is a picture taken from the crime scene. Again, that's where he's parked, right in front of the Culinary Institute. I want you to take the picture on the right up on the screen. This is just a Google Map image of the Culinary Institute. But what you can see, I'll stand up here. There's a man door there and a roll-up garage door, both that go into the Culinary Institute. Oh, thank you. A lot easier. And what we know is at 7:22 a.m. 30 seconds, Dan enters through this door, disables the alarm. He's the first person there that morning. And once he goes in, he goes around and he opens that roll-up door. Here on Exhibit 1, you'll see this is the layout of the Culinary Institute. It's a large building that takes up this whole portion of the block in that area. This is that side door that I talked about Mr. Brophy entering. Side door on 17. His car being parked somewhere, or his pickup being parked somewhere over here. This is that roll-up door that you can see in the photo over there. Again, that door was now open sometime after 7:22 a.m. That door open, Mr. Brophy is able to unload some larger objects from his pickup and easily carry them inside. Now at that time, Nancy Brophy would have had the opportunity to walk through this roll-up door and enter a building that she had been to several times in the past. A building that she was very familiar with, knowing the layout, knowing that there were no cameras inside or out, and even knowing the other employees' schedules. That would allow Ms. Brophy the opportunity to enter through the storeroom, navigate the labyrinth that is the Oregon Culinary Institute, and find Dan in the very back of the school, kitchen 1. Dan was standing at a sink, a commercial sink. He was filling up the ice and water buckets as he did every day for the students. He would have had his back to the door that Nancy Brophy likely entered into. Standing about right here. Nancy shot him first in the back. Penetrating his spine, piercing through his heart. After Dan fell onto his back, possibly paralyzed from the first shot, Nancy fired one more round into his chest, also piercing through Dan's heart. The medical examiner concluded that either shot could have been fatal. 2 9mm shell casings were recovered from the scene near Dan's body. Those 2 shell casings had consistent markings, as you'll hear from Leland Samuelson, as if they were fired from a Glock. Minutes later, at 7:28 a.m., Nancy can be seen once again on surveillance video, turning off of 17th Avenue, in front of the Culinary Institute, and onto Jefferson. She drives out of town towards her home. Nancy is then seen around her home a short time later by neighbors. They noted that she seemed distressed and kind of frantic. Nancy Brophy was claiming that she was looking for her dogs that had gotten out. However, the neighbors did not see any dogs. Nancy eventually returned home. The first call that morning came in at 9:54 a.m. from a good friend of Nancy's and Dan's, Maxine Bourgearding. Miss Bourgearding told Nancy that something had happened at the Oregon Culinary Institute, and there was a lot of police down there. Miss Brophy gets off the phone with Miss Bourgearding, and she calls Dan Brophy's phone 2 times. She also sends a text. She never tried to call him or text him again. Nancy Brophy then speaks to Miss Bourgearding several times, calling each other back and forth for about the next 10 minutes. Nancy Brophy then calls Karen Brophy. That's Dan Brophy's mother. As Miss Brophy explains to Karen Brophy that something has happened, Karen Brophy becomes concerned and asks why Nancy Brophy is not going to the Culinary Institute, why she has not left her house. And Nancy Brophy said something along the lines of, because there's going to be too much police activity down there. A short time later, Nancy Brophy did decide to finally drive down to the Culinary Institute. She arrived down there at about 10:28 a.m. About 20 minutes later, at 10:47 a.m., detectives conducted what they call a death notification. That is when there is a homicide of some sort. They will meet with the next of kin and explain that their loved one has died. The detectives recorded that death notification. And in that death notification, Nancy told detectives that she was home all morning. She even went on to explain the interactions that she had with Dan that morning.
And I was going to ask you, when you said Dan woke up, he's an early riser, has his routine, walks the dog, feeds the chickens. So this morning, did you wake up at the same time or after him, or how'd that go?
I didn't sleep well, and I don't know why I didn't sleep well, but I think that I'm to that age. So I woke up when he came up for a shower. So that would have been 6:50, 6:45.
And you said because he was getting a shower, that's when you woke up? Okay.
And he used to shower downstairs.
And then, so after he got his shower this morning, though,
Yeah, he managed to. He didn't need a spotter.
Okay. So, and then when did you see him after that? Did you have breakfast with him? What happened after that?
I didn't get out of bed.
Oh, you just kind of woke up and you were alert in bed.
Yeah,
Okay.
and we have our bedroom is an attic. Was an attic, and so the bathroom's right here, and so he got dressed and left.
Did he say? Did you guys talk before he left or anything like that?
About the water leak.
About 7 minutes to that same conversation, the detectives finally broke the news to her.
I just want to let you know that, we believe, Dan, we believe it's Dan that has been killed. Okay.
Yeah, I kind of got that when everybody gave me the sad sack look.
Yeah.
The reaction that she kind of figured. Nancy went on to explain during that same conversation that everyone loved Dan. Can't think of a single person who would want to hurt him. However, it's not until 10 minutes into this conversation that Nancy finally asks, "What happened?" And it's not until 47 minutes into the conversation that Nancy finally asks where Dan is. During the conversation, when asked if Dan and Nancy Brophy owned any guns, Miss Brophy disclosed that she had bought a Glock 17 at the gun show several months prior, and that she thought maybe that it was a 9mm, that sounded right, and that they bought the gun in response to recent school shootings. She said that when she got that gun home, she realized it wasn't something she wanted anymore. So instead of attempting to return it or sell it, she decided that it was too heavy and too ugly and that she just was going to put it away. She put it back in the case, put it up in a closet, and never even bought ammo for it. However, during that same conversation, even when asked about firearms, Nancy failed to mention that she had purchased a ghost gun build kit online. She also failed to mention that she purchased a slide and barrel from eBay. Now, after the death notification concluded, and you'll get to hear the entirety of that death notification, Detective Merrill enlisted the help of two other detectives, Detective Broughton and Detective Beniga. Now, Detective Merrill had asked Detective Broughton and Detective Beniga to accompany Nancy Brophy back to her home to ensure that the firearm that they had purchased at the gun show was still there, as the detectives at that time were concerned that maybe Dan Brophy had brought the gun with him to the school because he was worried about something. Now, Nancy Brophy believed that the gun was still at home and intact, so she agreed, and Detective Broughton actually drove Miss Brophy back to her home in her own minivan, so that she didn't have to drive after just learning that her husband had been shot to death. When they got back to the house, Nancy Brophy went straight to the closet, straight to where she believed the gun had been, and in fact it was there. And she handed the gun case over to Detective Broughton. Now, Detective Broughton and Detective Beniga took photographs of that gun before they collected it, and the condition that it was in when given to them by Miss Brophy. And what they noticed, as you can see in the big circle here, that slide and barrel is not seated appropriately on that firearm. Meaning, that gun is not ready to be loaded and fired. What they noticed, and they'll use a term called out of battery. This gun seems to be out of battery. And what that means is when that slide is not fully seated, that means it's been manipulated. That means that when that slide and barrel had been removed, when it was replaced, it was not properly set. Something you'll hear from the gun broker who sold her the gun. They would not have let the gun leave when purchased in that condition, meaning it was not ready to be made safe. Now, while Detective Broughton and Detective Beniga were at the Brophy home, Detective Merrill and Detective Posey were searching the area around the Oregon Culinary Institute for surveillance video. They went across the street to Bellagio's Pizza, roughly located around this area, kind of across from the Oregon Culinary Institute. And it had a camera angle that pointed north. As they watched that video, they recognized a minivan that they thought was visually consistent with Nancy Brophy's minivan, because they had just seen her with it downtown minutes prior. As they continued watching this video, they realized that this van actually passes, heading this direction, heading westbound, 2 separate times that morning. First at 7:08, and the second 7:28. Now, detectives knew that the next instructor had arrived at about 7:35 at the Culinary Institute. And detectives knew that Dan had disabled the alarm at 7:22 and 30 seconds. So now they had a window of opportunity for someone to kill Dan. They had about a 13-minute window, and as they're watching this video, they realize that it appears that Nancy Brophy is leaving the area of the Culinary Institute and heading out of town at 7:28, right in the middle of their window. After seeing that, Detective Merrill contacted Detective Beniga, who was still out at Miss Brophy's home. Detective Merrill requested that Detective Beniga take a photograph of the minivan and text it to him. Detective Beniga took several shots of the minivan on different angles. And when Miss Brophy saw that Detective Beniga was doing that, she immediately questioned him as to why he would need photographs of her van, because she wasn't at the Culinary Institute that morning. So what's the need? Detective Beniga nonetheless took the photographs and sent them on to Detective Merrill. Detective Merrill then compared that still shot on the left that Detective Beniga had taken. You can see him kind of in the reflection. What Detective Merrill noticed immediately was there's this large gouge in the picture that Detective Beniga sent. Compared to the photograph or the still shot that he's looking at in Bellagio's video, Detective Merrill believes there's a visually consistent mark in that minivan. Now Detective Merrill believed that this was in fact the minivan that Nancy Brophy was driving around that morning, and is the same minivan that he's seeing in the video. However, that was a direct contradiction to what Nancy Brophy just told them less than an hour prior during the death notification, when she was at home, and as you heard, further elaborated on the conversations and interactions that she had with Dan Brophy that morning. June 6th, 2018, just 4 days after the murder, when Detective Posey was speaking with Nancy Brophy, Nancy Brophy asked a question that Detective Posey has never been asked before.
Okay.
I don't want to do, but this may give you a laugh this afternoon. I don't want to be the stupid question of the day, but I think I need to be the stupid question of the day. So
Okay.
my insurance company said, well, just have the detective write a letter that you're no longer a suspect. And I said, man, I just don't know that he's there. And I'm not sure that he looks at it that way. But if you do, I get you to write the letter. My sister, when I told her this as a lawyer, laughed so hard she fell out of the chair. So
Why?
because
Why would you need that?
because they don't want to pay if it turns out that I secretly slipped down to the school and shot my husband, because I thought, hey, going into old age without Dan after 25 years, it's really what I'm looking for, you know.
Okay. Well,
So,
we never would do something like that.
I really didn't think so.
Yeah, I mean, that's not something that we never do something like that. That's never been done. I've never heard of that being done.
I was shocked when he told me this. And the other thing he says, well, I said, so what happens if, in fact, based upon your, and this is such a stupid little policy, I can't believe they're making me jump through the hoops like this. This is only $40,000. And as my sister said, you know, usually when they do that, it's for millions. And I said, yeah, we weren't insured for millions. But the other thing is, I said, what happens if, in fact, this case never gets resolved? And they said, well, that has to go to up to the supervisors to be evaluated. And I'm thinking, great.
So a little quiet.
But when this woman asked for this today, I thought,
It's a little quiet, but essentially what Miss Brophy was asking Detective Posey to do was to write a letter exonerating her from the murder, that she was no longer a suspect. And Miss Brophy's requesting this letter apparently, as she made a point to say that it's just a little $40,000 policy. She can't believe that she's being made jump through these hoops. However, as the investigation would later reveal, Nancy made claims on 10 separate life insurance policies in which she was the beneficiary of over $1.4 million. Detectives also discovered other financial incentives, as Nancy would have been entitled to all the equity in their home, as well as a workers' comp claim that would have paid because Dan was killed at his place of work. Through financial records, detectives discovered that Nancy Brophy was maintaining all those life insurance policies while continuing down a path of financial ruin. Investigators discovered, as I said, well over $1,000 per month was being paid into these policies at a time that they were struggling to even pay their mortgage. In fact, on certain months, foregoing to pay their mortgage. As you'll see throughout this trial, the investigation was wide and extensive. And based on the scene, detectives knew from the beginning that this was not a burglary, this was not a robbery, as the Oregon Culinary Institute was void of any evidence of those crimes. Nothing was out of place, as you'll see in the photographs and hear testimony from students and faculty, and nothing was missing. Despite the valuable items that are inside the Culinary Institute, nothing was missing, including things that Dan had on his person, his wallet, keys that were left on a table near the door, his cell phone, his watch, cash. None of it was touched. Eventually, all of the evidence and all of the leads the detectives followed up with all pointed back to Nancy Brophy, which resulted in her arrest on September 5th, 2018. As the officers placed the handcuffs on the wrist of a 68-year-old woman who had never been arrested before, she simply stated, "Oh, you must think I killed my husband." At the conclusion of the evidence, in this case, I will be asking you to return a verdict of guilty for the single charge of murder for the actions of Nancy Brophy on June 2nd, 2018, when she executed what she perhaps believed to be the perfect plan, when she ended the life of beloved chef Daniel Brophy. Thank you, Your Honor.
We need to change the choreography here a little bit. I'm going to use a different podium, and I need my tech person to help me get set up.
Does it make sense for the jury to take a break, or will this just be a few minutes?
Well, it makes sense for the jury to take a break. My next question, though, is would the court go past noon?
We will, if you're not
All
done. Yeah. All right, so we'll give the jurors another chance to stretch their legs and have you step out for just a moment. And why don't we go ahead and go off the record? And if everyone can rise for the jury again. All right, everyone can be seated. All right, please be seated. And when defense is ready.
Sorry, you guys, this is always the scariest part. Mr. Breton, do I need to?
There you go.
There's a delay on
We
that.
have liftoff. Good morning. During this trial, the state will present a circumstantial case that begs you to cast a blind eye to the most important circumstance of all. What's that? Well, it's love. 24 years, 10 months, 2 days. From the first day of their marriage to the last, Nancy Brophy was grateful. She had a husband who was adventurous, loving, playful, and she knew it was a rare gift. Nancy crampton-brophy has always been thoroughly, madly, crazy in love with Daniel Brophy, and she still is today. And Dan Brophy was in love with her, so much so that he talked to both his male and female friends about how much he appreciated his marriage. He was a wonderful man. And for Nancy Brophy, he was perfect. Their friends, no matter how they knew them, considered their marriage to be exemplary, even delightful. To appreciate the love that Nancy Brophy had for Dan Brophy, we have to go back a few years. It was the winter of 2015. Nancy Brophy was driving home in the dark. Ahead of her was another car. As she drove, she reached up to rub her right eye. Suddenly, she saw nothing at all. Pitch black. When she opened her right eye, the taillights were back. Nancy Brophy felt sick to her stomach. Her mother had suffered from macular degeneration, and she knew that this was a bad sign, a very, very bad sign. For months, Ms. Brophy was afraid to go to the doctor. But finally, on July 22nd of 2015, Ms. Brophy had an eye exam. The doctor told her that she had a large macular hole in her left eye. The hole would continue to get bigger, and there would be a further loss of vision. Ms. Brophy was scheduled for emergency surgery. But then a routine A1C test for diabetes caused the anesthesiologist to say no. It turned out that Nancy Brophy's blood sugar levels were sky high, and the surgery would be far too dangerous. Ms. Brophy was sent home to try to get her diabetes under control. And in the weeks that she waited for her blood sugar levels to come down, she fretted and worried. And on August 4th of 2015, she'd been up all night worrying about the surgery, worrying about her husband. And at 4:30 in the morning, she pulled out her laptop and began to write a letter to her husband. Dearest Dan, I love you. The years we've had together have been the very best of my life. It was you who made it possible. Thank you. While words are my life, I find myself somewhat at a loss to express how happy you've made me. Before I met you, I understood love in only a superficial way. Your belief in family and putting one's marriage front and center taught me about true emotion. After I saw Larry Schneider, I realized how difficult it would be for you if I died during surgery. More than anything, I'm afraid your life would be worse because you might leave money on the table that would help you get through this period. I'm not worried I'll die on the operating table, but one never knows. It's better to be prepared. And maybe I am just a little bit worried. Here's what you'll need to do. Get at least 5 death certificates from the funeral home. Ms. Brophy's letter then describes the life insurance policies that they owned on her life. She explained which policies would pay quickly, which might take a little more time. And then she gave her husband the password to her computer. And then she offered him some advice on selling the house. There's at least $150,000 to $200,000 equity in the house. Listen to what the realtor tells you. Spend some insurance money and fix up the yard. Pack up the house, sell it empty. If you decide not to sell the house, consider a roommate to offset the costs, or find a girlfriend. I understand you think you can live in a tiny house, but you like your stuff way too much to make that work. Regarding her possessions, Ms. Brophy said, I can't think of anything I care enough to worry about, except the wedding crystal and my jewelry. Save them for Adelaide, their granddaughter. Tell her it's special. Ms. Brophy then described the automatic monthly withdrawals that would come from her checking account that Dan Brophy should immediately end, but she flagged 2 payments that she thought he should continue to make. The first came out on the 21st of each month. It was $56 to F&G. She said to Dan, this is an insurance and a savings account for Addie's college fund. I hope you'll keep it. And on the 23rd of each month, $266 to Americo. This is insurance on you. Continue to pay this. You will get all the money back that you paid in about 9 years. The day before she had surgery, Nancy Brophy printed out the letter. She filled in the policy numbers and put the letter inside a bright purple folder labeled Dan. The next morning, Ms. Brophy put the folder on a shared desk in their office and left for her surgery. Nancy Brophy will testify, and much of what I share with you this morning, you will hear from her directly. But for now, let's talk a little bit about life insurance, because it's going to be an important part of this case. It is true, Nancy Crampton-Brophy firmly believes in life insurance, and her love and concern for her husband was demonstrated in the life insurance choices that she made over the years. Experts in this case are going to tell you more about life insurance, but let's see some of the basics. First, universal life and whole policies. What are they? Well, these are very expensive life insurance policies. They're expensive because these build up a cash value over time. The owner of the policy can borrow against the cash value. The owner of the policy can pay her premiums with the cash value. Now, the trick here, though, is that the cost of a whole life or universal life insurance policy can range from between 5 and 15 times the cost of a term insurance policy with the exact same death benefit. A return of premium policy. This is another very expensive policy. It is expensive because the insurance company will return all of your premiums that were paid so long as the insured person reaches a designated age. Term life insurance. This is typically the cheapest form of life insurance because it has no cash value, and it only covers a person's life for a specific number of years. If a person's only goal is to collect a death benefit, for example, $100,000 at the time of someone's death, term insurance is by far the cheapest vehicle. The other thing that's important about insurance is legal ownership. Ownership carries the right to name the beneficiary. It carries the right to terminate the policy, the right to take a loan against the policy, the right to receive the cash value, and the right to the entire return of premium if that's the sort of policy it is. Nancy Brophy made Dan Brophy the legal owner of every policy that insured his life. The other thing about insurance is that age matters. The older one gets, the harder it is to get really good insurance at a reasonable price. When one reaches the age of 60, the scope of attractive, available policies narrows considerably. In this case, age is important because Nancy Brophy was 4 years older than her husband. There were times in their marriage that he was eligible for policies for which she was not. Now let's look at the Brophy's policies. Nancy Brophy began purchasing life insurance for her and Dan decades before Dan's death. From 1996 until 2018, there was insurance covering Dan's life, and there was insurance covering Ms. Brophy's own life. Ms. Brophy's purchased the first policies in 1996 before she and Dan got married. The two of them were on their way to Hong Kong. The policies she bought were two identical term policies for $100,000. She bought the second set of policies in 2000, right after she and Dan had bought their house. One policy insured Dan's life for $250,000, and one policy insured Nancy's life for $250,000. She ended up keeping the earlier policy so that there would be enough money to cover the mortgage should one of them die. In 2007, Ms. Brophy changed careers. For a long time, she had run a catering company called Chef du Jour. As she started to get older and realized what a brutish career that would be as she headed into her 60s, she sold the catering company and took a job selling life insurance. The first company she worked for was a company called American Income Life. So in 2007, as an employee of American Income Life, Nancy Brophy bought two $100,000 universal life policies from her employer. She kept the $250,000 policy she'd bought earlier in place, so that, again, that there would be enough money to cover their mortgage should one of them die. In 2011, Ms. Brophy changed employers. So in 2011, she stopped paying on the American Income Life policies and bought two very similar policies from her new company, Lincoln Heritage. Again, one policy insured Dan's life for $100,000, and the other insured Nancy's life for $100,000. Why change policies for the same amount of a benefit? Well, part of it had to do with employer loyalty. A key to selling an insurance policy is the vote of confidence that comes from owning the insurance of the company you represent. The other reason, though, and it was a financial reason, and many insurance experts will tell you this, Ms. Brophy earned a commission on each policy she sold, and that included the policies that she purchased for herself or sold to herself to insure her life or her husband's life. So there was always a financial incentive, at least after the first year, to change policies from time to time. In 2012, Ms. Brophy moved to another brokerage firm called NAS. Again, she bought two new policies for her and Dan. These were Mutual of Omaha policies for $150,000 each. These policies were replaced the following years with better policies. And that's one of the things I want you to know. You will hear throughout this case that Ms. Brophy has bought policies, and you'll see that they continue through the years. But the important thing to pay attention to is whether she's actually paying premiums to continue those policies, because many of the policies that the state relies upon were not in force at the time of Dan's death. So one of the things we're going to ask each of you to track is not just whether a policy was purchased, but whether the premiums were being paid and the policy was in effect at a given time. In 2012, not only did Ms. Brophy buy these two new life insurance policies from her new employer, that year she added a very inexpensive accidental death policy that covered both her and Dan as a family plan. That was for $250,000. The first time that Ms. Brophy did not buy identical policies was in 2012. This is the year that she bought two foresters policies. The policy insuring her life was for $50,000, and the policy insuring Dan's life was for $40,000. In this case, it was Dan's gender that was the key. For the same premium, she could get $50,000 on her life and $40,000 on her husband's life. In 2013, the Oregon Culinary Institute bought a policy for its employees. It was a group life insurance policy, and each employee was entitled to up to $50,000 of coverage. Ms. Brophy will tell you that this was not a policy that was considered part of the Brophy's overall financial plan. Excuse me. Why? Well, Nancy and Dan Brophy had witnessed 2 culinary schools go belly up. First it was Western Culinary Institute, and then it was Cordon Bleu. You'll hear in this case that actually the Oregon Culinary Institute has gone bankrupt as well. It's also true that Dan Brophy got fired from his job from Western. And so what they knew is that an employer policy might be here today, but it very well could be gone tomorrow. And it wasn't something that either one of them wanted to rely upon, especially as they got older and insurance was going to be more difficult to replace. In June of 2014, Nancy Brophy would turn 64 and Dan Brophy would turn 60. Ms. Brophy knew that age 60 would be the very last year that she could get a really good policy on Dan Brophy's life, at least one at a reasonable price. So in 2014, Nancy bought 2 policies, each covering the other, for $100,000. But Dan's Americal policy was much, much more expensive than a term policy like the one she had on her life. Our expert will tell you that it likely cost 3 times as much as a 20-year term policy for $100,000 and 6 times as much as a 10-year term policy for $100,000. So why would Nancy pay premiums that were 6 times higher for the same death benefit? She paid those higher premiums because she was betting that Dan Brophy would reach the age of 78. And if Dan Brophy reached the age of 78, he would get all of the premiums that they had paid for that policy over time. If Dan reached the age of 78, on his 78th birthday, he would pocket $65,000 in cash, and his $100,000 death benefit would continue on. Dan's return of premium policy was something that wasn't available to Ms. Brophy at the time due to her age. You might have noticed this little gold box on it says Fidelity. You can barely see Fidelity, but trust me, that's what it says. The Fidelity box on the screen. This represents a policy that Dan Brophy bought as a condition of his divorce settlement. The beneficiary of this policy was his ex-wife, Perla. This policy stayed in force for many years until the term ended. But in 2015, Fidelity Insurance offered Dan a really cheap renewal. I mean, we're talking maybe something that costs $20 a month, $30 a month. Dan renewed that policy and this time made Nancy Brophy the beneficiary. This was a policy that Dan continued to pay for out of his own accounts. Ms. Brophy did not make any of the payments or control the beneficiary. Now, by November of 2016, Nancy Brophy was 66 years old. She was now collecting Social Security, and she was trying to transition into a career of selling Medicare. Until now, Nancy and Dan were pretty equal income earners. There were some years where one did better than the other, but for the most part, they both kind of had their oar in the water, and their family income was made out of 2 pretty equal incomes. But in 2016, as Nancy went on to Social Security and was starting to make a change in her insurance career, Dan became the primary earner. And as the window to affordable insurance would now close for Dan, who was now 62, Nancy bought a term policy from American Amicable. Again, that purchase occurred on November 6th of 2016. The same policy wouldn't have been affordable on Nancy's life due to her age. Now keep in mind again that Nancy Brophy earns commissions on every policy she sells. So this policy that was purchased in November of 2016 paid a commission to the Brophies. So she and Dan Brophy had an influx of cash just as the holidays neared. The other thing that happened in 2016, actually it really happened in 2015 as they started to put the bones into this. Nancy's surgery and the whole finding out that she had diabetes and having this thing that was very, very scary for her made her think that they needed to get their ducks in a row. They needed to figure out what they owned, what they didn't own. They needed to come up with a concrete plan to get into retirement, especially because she was 4 years older. So in 2016, she and Dan Brophy began to work in concert to phase into retirement. Both of them were in lines of work that would allow them to kind of turn the faucet down a little bit and maybe unwind gradually. But they knew that whatever they did, they needed to work together if it was going to be successful. Dan and Brophy's plan involved 4 parts. First, Nancy Brophy would begin to take Social Security benefits. Second, Nancy would shift from selling life insurance to selling Medicare, and she and Dan could rely on a stream of Medicare commissions that would take them well into their 70s, maybe longer than that. Dan Brophy planned to keep working at OCI for at least another 5 years. And the 4th part of their plan involved the subdivision and sale of their house. Their hope was to do this sometime in 2018. Well, applying for Social Security revealed an embarrassing fact. After throwing a huge wedding for family and friends in 1997, neither of the Brophies had remembered to file the marriage license. The Brophies had believed that they were married. They'd always filed their taxes as husband and wife, but in the eyes of the law, they were not legally married. Dan and Nancy joked about having another big party, but in the end, they settled for a trip to the Washington County Courthouse. The next step toward retirement was for Nancy Brophy to transition from selling life insurance to a career selling Medicare. Why the change? Well, first of all, selling life insurance is really hard, especially the way Nancy Brophy did it. It required buying leads from someone else and then literally going out and knocking on people's doors who maybe had expressed some remote interest in buying life insurance and convincing them to buy a policy as you stood on their doorstep. If you were lucky enough to sell the policy that day and that client sometime within the first year stopped paying the premiums, the salesperson had to give her commission back. This had been a huge headache for the Brophies over time. They had money, they'd spent the money, and then all of a sudden they had to scrape money together to repay a commission because someone had abandoned their policy. It wasn't true of Medicare. Medicare allowed for an income stream that would not just come from the first time, but would carry you through. With life insurance, people buy one policy, maybe one policy in their lifetime. But with Medicare, and for those of you who are younger, you might not recognize this, Medicare can be tricky, and it's really nice to have a Medicare broker who will keep tabs on you, who will figure out what your prescriptions are, and who each year will help you kind of get the right policy to meet your needs. And if you're that person, your client probably only sees you once a year, but there's a good chance that you are going to have that client from the first day they become your client until later on when they pass and they no longer need Medicare. So in 2015, Nancy sold about 11 Medicare policies. In 2016, she sold about 44 new Medicare policies, but she re-enrolled the 11 clients she'd taken the year prior. In 2017, she sold about 120 new Medicare policies. Now, all of these clients rolled together were clients that she expected to keep year after year after year. She expected that if she could make this, build up her book of clients over this next few years, that she and Dan, so long as she just made a telephone call or checked in with somebody or just took the time to make sure she knew what their medications were, she expected that each one of these clients would be paying commissions long into her and Dan's later ages. And she assumed that they would have a nice little steady income stream to carry them into retirement. Now, Dan Brophy was enthusiastic about Ms. Brophy's new line of work. On the mornings that his wife left to work the Medicare kiosk, he would pack her a lunch, and then invariably, he would send her a sweet little encouraging message as she hit the kiosk. For example, happy, happy kiosk days are here again. Nancy, hey, I sold a policy just sitting here. Dan, good work, keep up the job. There are about 3 years worth of text messages between Dan Brophy and Nancy Brophy that the police took off of Dan Brophy's phone. Throughout these messages, you will see Dan offering encouragement to Nancy, not just with respect to her Medicare policies, but in every other aspect of her life. He also expressed encouragement with respect to the specific retirement plan that the two of them had agreed to. Now, a Medicare career has a downside. It's a temporary downside, but it's definitely a downside. When you sell Medicare, there's a substantial delay between when you make a sale of the policy and when your commissions actually hit your bank account. Nancy Brophy could sell to her heart's content in 1 year, but the Brophies would not get paid any of her earned commissions until the following year. Dan and Nancy both knew that this commission payment structure was going to create a short-term cash flow crunch in the summer and fall. But they made adjustments, and they planned adjustments to make this work. And they both knew it was going to get a lot easier if Nancy had the time to build up this book of Medicare clients, and they no longer had a substantial mortgage. So in the summer or fall of 2017, Nancy Brophy did work her tail off at Medicare kiosks. She traveled all over the place to develop a client base. One day she was in a Walgreens in McMinnville. Another day she was at a Fred Meyer in Oregon City. And on the days that she wasn't sitting in a kiosk, she was at the United Healthcare office doing phone blitzes. After phone blitzes, she traveled to clients' homes. She went to the coast, she went to Hood River, she went to Vernonia, she went to Estacada. She went everywhere. It is this period of time, in the summer and fall of 2017, that the state focuses on when it tells you that the Brophies were desperate, that the Brophies were broke, that the Brophies were feeling a financial catastrophe that caused Nancy Brophy to murder her husband. It is true. In August of 2017, money was very tight for the Brophies. But again, Dan and Nancy came up with a plan that offset the delay in the commission payments. As for the third part of the plan, Dan Brophy did keep teaching at OCI. But in the fall of 2017, he decided that he would teach weekend classes in 2018 rather than teaching Monday through Friday. When a longtime friend named Tanya Medlin offered Dan a part-time job at Avamere Rehabilitation Center, actually cooking for people, Dan Brophy jumped on it. He and Nancy agreed that they could use the extra money that he made to pay down their credit card debt and to pay off the second mortgage. And it's true that between November of 2017 and June of 2018, when Dan died, they had significantly reduced their credit card debt, and they had significantly paid down the second mortgage. So why did Dan Brophy take a second job, part-time work at Avamere? Well, Dan Brophy was on board with the retirement plan that the two of them had mapped out together. The fourth part of the Brophy transition plan, and this is important, was a plan to subdivide their large lot and sell all or part of it off. The Brophy's goal was to have no mortgage in retirement. This is a Google view of the Brophy's property, and this was taken after Dan's death, so you're not really going to see what the property looked like as Nancy and Dan entered into this transition plan. But on the lower part of this, you will see a little blue house in tiny little letters that say 3380. There's a garage with a little white car, or maybe a truck, and a little gray car in the driveway. That would be the Brophy's property. And it runs from southwest 108th Avenue all the way back to where you see those little white structures at the back of the property. Right next to the Brophy property, if you look at the top of the screen, is a lot that was identical in size and shape to the Brophy's. The owner of that property initially just had his house by himself, but as he faced retirement, he had that lot broken into 3 taxable lots. He made a significant profit by doing that. He was able to actually stay in his own home, but he had made an excellent financial decision, and the Brophy's paid attention to that. So, in June of 2017, Nancy and Dan Brophy both talked with a friend of theirs named Richard Frymark. Mr. Frymark is a commercial realtor. He doesn't really do residential work. But they asked him what it would take to subdivide their property, just like their neighbor. Mr. Frymark gave them the name of an engineering firm that could help the Brophy create these 3 taxable lots. He did, however, urge them to get the backyard cleaned up before the property was evaluated for sale. Now, there was a residential realtor who lived down the street from the Brophy's. He came by to look at the property, and he estimated that if they were able to subdivide this triple lot, that they could, it could result in a sale of $700,000 or maybe even more. But the residential realtor, a man named Paul Johnston, also warned the Brophy's that if they wanted to make that kind of a profit, they were going to need to clean up the back of their lot. During this time, Richard Frymark ran a title report on the Brophy's property. He was alarmed to see that even though Nancy Brophy had been on the deed when they first bought the house, when Nancy and Dan had refinanced sometime in the mid-2000s, she had somehow fallen off of the deed. So Mr. Frymark sent them the paperwork to correct the problem. The evidence will show that Nancy, let's see if I can get this to work. The evidence will show that after she received this paperwork that Nancy talked to Dan about it. Dan, how's the day treating you? Nancy, okay, I left some papers on the table dining room. Take them to the bank and get them notarized. They put my name on the deed, which Richard says will make the future paperwork easier. Dan, will we go to the bank together? Nancy, you don't need me. Dan, allegedly, I would prefer accompaniment. Why did Dan Brophy agree to go put Nancy Brophy on the lease in 2017? Well, he did it because he knew that she was a part owner of the property, but he also did it because he was trying to pave the way so that when they sold their home later on, things would go more smoothly. In other words, Dan Brophy was in on the plan. Now, we've talked about this lot and how it didn't look anything like the overhead that you'd seen. Dan Brophy was a gardener. He loved gardening. He treated this back lot is probably like I think the whole lot is about a half acre. So the back lot is probably 2/3 of that. Dan treated this large backyard like a little mini farm. He'd grown up in the country, and he loved having what he called his life science experiments in his backyard. Now, Nancy Brophy loved that about him. She loved that he smelled like the earth. But she would have drawn the line at Dan's chickens. And the chickens became a running joke in their marriage. Dan Brophy knew, though, that somewhere along the line, that property had gotten completely out of control for him. He even texted friends between 2017 and 2018, describing how overwhelming the project was. Several witnesses will testify that cleaning up this back lot was a massive, massive project. The backyard was covered in blackberry bushes that were 12 to 16 feet high. Dan had buried these big steel barrels and commercial sinks for his various science projects. Cleaning up the backyard was not something that Dan and Nancy were going to be able to do alone. They could play a part, but they both knew that they were going to need professional help, and it was going to be expensive. The evidence will demonstrate that Dan Brophy was fully in agreement with paying the money to get this back lot cleaned up so that they could subdivide and sale. In September of 2017, in the midst of this low cash flow period that he and his wife had anticipated, Dan Brophy took a $35,000 loan against his retirement. Now, Dan Brophy had done this in the past. There was a time when they needed a new roof and they had borrowed against the retirement. Dan had paid it all back as required, and they had agreed that this might be a good time to take that loan again. The purpose wasn't just to bring the mortgage due. If during this cash flow crunch, all he'd wanted to do was bring the mortgage current, he would have taken much less out. The goal was both to bring the mortgage current, but also to fix up the house, because Dan knew it was going to be expensive to get the property ready to sell. Dan asked that they kind of wait until the harvest was behind him in 2017 before they actually brought the landscapers in. But in November of 2017, Nancy Brophy began to look for landscapers who were willing to do the work. Nancy, getting the first bid on the yard today. Dan, cool, are you home already? Nancy, no, he's looking by himself. Dan, okay, I'll be home in about a half an hour. Nancy, he may be gone. I found the name because it's advertised that he can deal with the blackberry bushes. She did get a few bids, but the truth is in November of 2017, most of the people who came to look at the property were absolutely unwilling to even make a bid or take on the challenge. Dan's unique garden was such a huge challenge that they didn't know if they had the equipment to handle it. Dan, with his father's help, had buried scores of tubs, wine barrels, utility sinks, all to keep his plants contained. Because they were buried and not sitting on the top of the ground, the removal process required heavier equipment than many landscapers had. When they finally hired the dynamic duo of James Denny and Tamara Alva, Dan affectionately called them the Yard Warriors. The Yard Warriors will testify in this trial. They will testify that both Dan and Nancy were preparing that house to sell and that Dan was very much a part of the plan. James Denny will testify that he and Dan worked closely to sift through Dan's many possessions in the backyard and decide what would go and what would stay. Dan was in complete control of that process. He had the final say, and Dan was never irritated or grumpy with James Denny. In fact, James Denny got the sense that the unburdening in many ways felt good to Dan Brophy. You'll hear that Dan Brophy was a collector. And over the course of their marriage, their long, long marriage, Nancy tolerated Dan's habit of collecting. She never seemed, at least to James Denny, to be all that annoyed that Dan had so much stuff. And she expressed kind of an understanding that as long as it took to collect all that stuff, it was going to take a little while to uncollect it. She was willing to go slowly and to let Dan and Mr. Denny sort out the pacing, as Dan was really willing to let go of things. They were working together again to tackle this joint project because it was a project that was easier together than apart. The Yard Warriors started their work cleaning up this backyard in December of 2017. But by May, when the Brophies initially planned to subdivide the lot and then market the house, the Yard Warriors weren't even close to having the yard ready to be subdivided and placed on the market. But Dan and Nancy then decided, well, if we can't make the summer sales season, we will shoot for the fall of 2018. So with the sale of the house on hold until the fall, Dan took the parts that the yard warriors had already cleared out and again built himself little gardens in the area that was available. But the understanding was that the yard warriors would continue on in their efforts, still with the goal of having everything done by the fall. Dan and Nancy had for many, many years a very incredible travel life. I think they'd been to 3 different continents, 30 different countries. I don't know, 30 countries. I might have my numbers wrong, but they'd been to many, many different countries. They'd been all over the world. They'd been to Hong Kong. They had visited Dan's parents in Thailand. They'd gone a bunch of different places, and it was a huge part of the life that they enjoyed together. They really enjoyed travel. As Nancy was approaching retirement, 4 years older than Dan, she was starting to think about travel and how much fun that would be. As happens with any couple, the Brophies did have to negotiate some changes in their plan here and there, never the core of the plan. For example, there was a time that Nancy got really excited about moving to Portugal. She imagined that she and Dan could have a house for not very much money, live on their Social Security in Portugal, and then they could use that as a place that they could then travel all around Europe. Dan thought that traveling in Europe would be interesting, but he wasn't particularly interested in being an expat. He wasn't sure he'd have enough to do, and he thought that Portugal might be too hot. Well, they talked about it. And they both knew that they would miss Dan's family terribly, so they compromised. They decided that they would stay in Portland indefinitely, and they would simply build more travel into their life. So beginning in 2017, they began to travel more frequently. In 2017, Dan Brophy actually joined his wife on a cruise filled with romance writers. I don't know how many guys were there besides Dan, but they enjoyed themselves. In the summer of 2017, the Brophies celebrated their June birthdays with a week at the beach. Dan and Nancy both had June birthdays, so each year the celebration of birthdays happened together, and typically they would get away. In January of 2018, Dan and Nancy spent a week at a romantic bed and breakfast in British Columbia. In March of 2018, they took another romantic trip to Monterey and took a couple of cooking classes. And at the time Dan Brophy died, Nancy and Dan were planning a summer trip to Mount Rushmore, a trip that Dan had always wanted to make. One of the lovely things about the Brophy marriage was that while they had many, many interests that overlapped, they loved cooking, they loved travel, they loved each other's sense of humor, but they also had interests that were their very own. Dan Brophy loved mushroom hunting, he loved his chickens, and he loved living life as a science project. Nancy Brophy loved writing. You will hear from several of Ms. Brophy's writer friends. You will learn that research, especially hands-on research, is a big part of many writers' lives. To support her writing, Ms. Brophy has spent good money on night vision goggles, a telescope, law enforcement quality handcuffs, high-powered binoculars, art supplies, antique glass doorknobs, and lots of locks. Ms. Brophy's not alone. Other writers splurged too. You will hear from at least 2 writers. One bought a giant crossbow that is as tall as I am to support her writing. Another writer, Delilah, writes Victorian romance. For years, Delilah searched for a chastity belt that she could afford. And Delilah will assure you that it was not to use with her husband. Instead, she wanted to know how the hinges felt. She wanted to know what it sounded like when the key was inserted. She wanted to feel how heavy it was. Ms. Brophy's writer friends will also describe Ms. Brophy's immersive writing process, which they have witnessed firsthand. Several writers will tell you that they have been at writing retreats with Ms. Brophy, and that her practice is to literally place herself in a corner. She'll stare at the ceiling or stare at a wall, and no one hears from her for a couple of hours. When she's finally jolted back into the group presence, she typically can come out with a story that includes characters, scenes, chapters. Her writer friends were amazed that she could literally create an entire novel sometimes in her brain as she stared into space without once putting her pen to paper. Other writers will talk about Nancy's creative process more generally. They will tell you that one of the things Nancy really liked was these drives, these long drives that she had to take as part of her Medicare career. She loved driving because that was when her brain was the most creative. She could drive out to McMinnville and have several new ideas for her writing by the time that she got there. Shift again. Firearms. Understand what happened in this case, you need to take yourself back to 2017 in the United States of America. That was a year that our entire country was talking about guns. Nancy Brophy was certainly a part of that conversation. Listening carefully to the bellicose tone of our country's discourse, Nancy started to have a shift in her thinking. Nancy Brophy did not grow up with guns. Her family does not like guns. She came from a family of lawyers, and she'd spent her college years advocating for very progressive causes. Guns were not her thing. Even when she was married to a police officer in the 70s, she showed no interest in guns. But she had friends who had guns, and they were law-abiding. And at a family gathering in November of 2017, Ms. Brophy realized that all of Dan Brophy's family had guns. Dan's brother had a gun. Dan's dad had a gun. Dan's son Nathaniel owned several firearms. In fact, Nathaniel had even built an AR-15 on his own from a gun kit. To her great surprise, she learned that Dan Brophy's mother owned a stun gun. 2017 was a year also of numerous mass shootings, especially school shootings. And Nancy Brophy paid close attention to that news. On November 16th of 2017, a nutty guy named Kevin Neal shot his wife and 4 of her friends with a homemade gun. Then Mr. Neal tried unsuccessfully to enter an elementary school to randomly shoot at children. The crime occurred in California, but it quickly became national news. Mr. Neal could not lawfully purchase a firearm because he had a restraining order out on him, but he found a way around that by building himself his own gun from parts. The New York Times and several other major news outlets covered this story, noting that gun kits were legal and that some states had begun to consider limitations on their sale. Now again, in 2017, the ATF and federal authorities made it clear that they had no interest in regulating gun kits themselves or gun building by individuals, but they said they would strictly impose any effort to sell a gun without a registration once it had been constructed and made operable. After reading this news story about Mr. Kevin Neal, Nancy started to think about writing a book that flipped the script on a guy like that. The story she had in her mind was about a woman in an abusive relationship. In the story, the woman is afraid to leave her partner, but she's also afraid that she's going to get killed if she stays. The woman cannot legally buy a gun because she'd been hospitalized for depression as a young woman. A related New York Times article Ms. Brophy read at the time included links to the online gun sites that had been cited in the article. So in late November of 2017, Ms. Brophy used those links, including one to a place called ghostgunner.net, to see what was there. Ms. Brophy was fascinated with her storyline, and she went back to those sites several times over the next few weeks. So as to better describe her protagonist's experience, Ms. Brophy considered whether she should buy a gun kit and put it together as she wrote the book. On Christmas Eve, after a couple of glasses of wine, Ms. Brophy splurged, and she bought herself a gun kit from one of those two sites in the New York Times article, ghostguns.com. She thought of the purchase as kind of a jigsaw puzzle where she could put a gun together from pieces. That week after New Year's, Dan and Nancy Brophy went to Sook Harbor, British Columbia, for a romantic getaway. Dan put a hold on their mail. When they returned to Portland, Dan went to the post office to pick up the mail. He brought the gun kit home. Miss Brophy was excited to open it, but soon realized that putting a gun kit together was not as she had imagined. She asked Dan, "Do we have a drill press?" Dan laughed and assured her that they did not. The gun kit kind of was stowed into the closet, but Nancy Brophy continued to work on this story. As she continued to develop this storyline, she realized that she could not machine a gun kit, certainly not the one she'd purchased, but she wondered whether a better puzzle would be to analyze the actual gun parts. During this time period, Nancy Brophy talked to several of her writer friends about this story. She told some of them that she had bought a gun kit to build the gun from parts as she wrote the story. Her more knowledgeable friends laughed and told her that buying a gun kit was a stupid idea. She agreed, acknowledging that she had learned that lesson too late. As she continued to develop the storyline, Miss Brophy wondered whether a better puzzle would be to analyze the actual gun parts. She continued to research guns and gun parts, but much of the research that she did coincided with her anticipation of writer events. The other truth is, the more she read about guns, the more she wondered whether she and Dan shouldn't own a gun. Nancy mentioned to a friend that she wished Dan would take a gun with him when he went mushroom hunting. Dan hunted mushrooms alone, deep in the woods, and he'd often told her that mushroom hunting could be pretty dangerous because people were so territorial about their mushroom spots. Dan didn't take the risk as seriously as Nancy Brophy did, but she worried anyway. On January 31st, Ms. Brophy met with a writer friend during the day, and she talked about her story. That evening, she went back to the same sites and again researched gun kits. The next morning, on February 1st, Ms. Brophy woke up to a follow-up news story about the Las Vegas mass shooter. You might remember he was the guy who leaned out of a casino window and shot all the people who were attending a concert down below. This was a follow-up story, but it's one that she'd been following for some time. After reading that story that night, Ms. Brophy researched gun stores in Oregon. On February 14th, there was a mass shooting in Florida. This was the shooting at the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School. The next day, Nancy Brophy researched how much does a Glock 17 cost, gun safety classes, and the Portland Expo gun show. Nancy Brophy lobbied Dan Brophy again. This time, her husband acquiesced and agreed she should go buy a gun. The next day, Ms. Brophy withdrew $400 from her checking account. Now, she knew from her research that a gun was likely to cost over $600, but Dan Brophy had agreed to split the cost. On February 17th, Ms. Brophy went to the gun show. She presented her legal certification and bought a fully legal, fully registered handgun. When she brought the gun home, Dan looked it over. He wasn't really sure they were gun people. Dan wasn't excited about carrying the gun. In fact, he told Ms. Brophy that he had absolutely no interest in packing heat when he went mushroom hunting. Truth is, Nancy never carried the gun either. In fact, when the Oregon State criminalist later examined that gun, he said it was in like new condition. The cleaning brush appears to have never been used. The manual and the cleaning kit were still sealed. Dan Brophy thought maybe they should sell the gun. Nancy Brophy thought about taking the gun apart. but she agreed with Dan that it would probably be better to keep it like new. They both thought they might be able to sell it somewhere down the road someday. Nancy had actually done some research and realized that those private sales were more complicated in the state of Oregon. We will prove that when, let me take you back a minute. About 2 days after she brought this gun home, and they decided that Dan really wasn't going to carry it and had some real doubts about whether they were gun people, Nancy Brophy went back to these sites that she'd been visiting. And again, these sites are typically the ghost gun type sites. And she's already purchased a ghost gun, but she went back to the sites. And this time, a pop-up or some kind of an ad for a slide came onto her screen. And she went ahead and bought it. She assumed that it might be easier to take a slide apart and probably more cost effective than to try to take this gun apart that she and Dan were trying to keep in new condition. We'll prove that when that slide was delivered to the Brophy home, it was Dan Brophy who took delivery. Nancy Brophy was in McMinnville selling Medicare. Later, Ms. Brophy watched a YouTube showing how to disassemble the slide. Let's shift our focus again to the week before Dan Brophy died. Nancy Brophy has always had several stories living in her head, but she also had several partially or completely written books. She had been sending pitches to publishers for years. And on May 25th, a really exciting email popped into her inbox. A publisher was interested in the first book of a trilogy she'd written called Witches, a Love Story. Over the next several days, Nancy Brophy was living constantly with her characters from this book the publisher was interested in. Her characters Phaedra and Celestial and Hope were ever present in her brain. The night before Dan died, Nancy Brophy didn't sleep well. She'd been up all night thinking about her characters and a problem with the plot in this story. When she was later interviewed by police, Nancy, having already determined that the person who had been shot was her husband, something she gleaned by just looking at the sad faces of the people staring out at her as she got near OCI. She told the police that Dan got up around 4 a.m. to feed the chickens and walk the dogs. This was his usual morning routine. She said that when he came upstairs to shower, she talked to him about a leak under the sink. She will tell you that she believes that sometime between 6 and 6:30, she did what she would normally do on the morning she doesn't go to work. She left her nightshirt on, she added a pair of tights and some flip-flops, and she drove to the Starbucks drive-thru to get her coffee. She will tell you that she was still fully immersed in her story, and she drove, thinking about a detail and then stopping to briefly jot down her thought, and then driving some more as she worked out the next detail. You'll hear evidence from two psychologists. They will explain to you what can happen to the human memory when a person suffers a traumatic shock. Learning that one's husband has been murdered is perhaps one of the most extreme shocks that any one of us can imagine. It's the emotional equivalent of being hit by a freight train one didn't see coming. There is literally a chemical flood to the brain that disrupts the neurological coding and storage of memories. The disruption, the chemical disruption, will affect a person immediately, but it can also leave large memory holes for events that happened before, during, and after a traumatic event. One of the psychologists, Dr. Warford, is also an expert in domestic violence and the components of a healthy marriage. She's reviewed the discovery in this case, including the police interviews, and the last 3 years of text messages between Dan and Nancy Brophy. Dr. Warford has also interviewed and conducted a battery of psychological tests on Ms. Brophy. Dr. Warford's professional opinion will support a core defense fact. Nancy Brophy and Dan Brophy had an unusually healthy and vibrant marriage right up until the very end. Nancy's marriage was so healthy that the younger people that they mentored wanted a marriage just like theirs. Nancy Brophy's niece, Susan Estrada, lived with the Brophies for, well, a few different times, but once for about a year. She told the police they had a great marriage. They had one of those rare few relationships that made me think, hey, marriage might not be a bad idea. Another witness admired Dan and Nancy's relationship so much that she said, I knew I wanted a Brophy marriage for myself. A friend who was in their home weekly would say, I would have loved to have had a marriage like theirs. Nancy Brophy's very best friends, the women who have known her, some of them since college, but most of them for decades, will tell you that Nancy Brophy was crazy about Dan Brophy, and that never changed. Just a sample of the testimony you'll hear at trial. Dan was perfect for Nancy, and Nancy knew it. Nancy always talked sweetly about Dan. Whenever I was around Nancy, it was Dan this, Dan that. Nancy admired and respected Dan. You could see that every time they were together. Nancy described Dan as the smartest man she knew. She was so proud of him. It was like they had been married for 100 years. Each of them talked so positively about the other. They accepted each other. They supported each other. They obviously enjoyed each other's company. Nancy's very closest personal friends will tell you that in all of the time they have known Nancy Brophy, she has never badmouthed her husband. I've known Nancy for donkey years, and she has never had a harsh word for Dan. If Nancy complained about Dan, it was, quote, in the way a happy woman does. For example, she complained about Dan's noisy chickens, but she always gathered her leftovers from lunch to take home to them. She even bought Dan a chicken suit as part of their running joke. It cracked him up, and he enjoyed dressing up in it. Nancy told her friends that things about Dan that end up driving you a little bit nuts are also the most enticing. That never changed. Nancy Brophy knew that she was very, very blessed to have the marriage that she did, and so she nurtured it. For years at writer conferences, Nancy Brophy talked to Dan every night. Her roommates at those conferences often heard her tell him, I love you. Anyone who claims that Nancy's relationship to Dan had changed is just wrong. Wrong. Even little things will demonstrate that truth. On May 4th, less than a month before Dan died, Nancy was at the Sylvia Beach Hotel for a writer's event. After dinner, she went upstairs to call her husband. She left him a sweet voice message that was still on his phone when he died.
Hey, we made it. This has turned out to be a really fun little group, and we're staying the Hemingway room. The animals weren't as bad. First off, they're done with either books or newsprint, and so they're kind of paper mache, and they're really kind of.
Right, we can't
So I'm not as offended by that. Our window is open. We can get a breeze from the coast. But call me when you get this. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Sorry, folks, I have no control over the volume, but in any event, she left Dan the same kind of message that she'd left him 1,000 times. Later, he called her, and they did have a chance to chat more. The fact is, though, literally a month before Dan died, Dan and Nancy Brophy were doing the lovely, kind things that they'd always done for each other. They were staying in touch with each other. They were telling each other about their days. In fact, while Nancy was at the Sylvia Beach Hotel, one of the things that she said to her friends after they had gone to a little hole-in-the-wall restaurant somewhere at the beach was that she could not wait to tell Dan Brophy about this restaurant. It was the kind of place that he would love. And she was excited as they scooted back to the hotel to share this new discovery with her husband. The state suggests that Nancy Brophy's life was going to get a lot better when Dan was gone. They're wrong. Nancy was lost after Dan was killed. Her friends will tell you that she sounded very confused. It was as though the earth had fallen away from her feet. Nancy was overwhelmed. A friend says Nancy was very un-Nancy. After Dan died, she appeared totally blank. She was in shock. We saw her cry, and I've only seen her tear up one other time. She's a Southern-raised woman, and that stiff upper lip is paramount. To see her cry was extremely rare. She apologized to us for crying. She was embarrassed, but she was grief-stricken. She was in total shock. Dan's sudden death also upended the Brophy's plan to legally subdivide this lot for a larger profit. While they had managed to get Nancy on the deed, Dan was the only one on the mortgage. And since Nancy was almost 68 years old, it was very unlikely that Wells Fargo would agree to add her to the mortgage. After Dan died, Ms. Brophy talked with Richard Freimark again. He told her about a likely problem. If the bank learned that its sole note holder had died, it was likely to call the entire note due. This fact had Nancy Brophy scrambling to get the house cleaned up and sold before Wells Fargo got wind of Dan Brophy's death. The bank would be treated fairly, but so would she. Subdividing the lot was now just too lengthy of a process to complete. She simply needed to get that backyard cleaned up as best she could, sell the house as quickly as possible, and pay off the note. She also really wasn't ready for Dan's death because the will was lost. The friends who were with her in the time after this will tell you that there was huge chaos and panic over the fact that Nancy Brophy could not find the wills that she and Dan had put together several years before. Finally, maybe a month, even longer after Dan's death, Jack Brophy came to the house with some friends from the church. They were trying to clean out a garage that had been filled to the gills with some of Dan's collectibles. And in the very back of the box, in back of the garage in a box, Jack Brophy found the will. Nancy Brophy was so relieved. The other thing that was lost that summer was that Medicare enrollment season that was going to come in 2018. That was the year that Nancy thought that she could maybe sell another 200 policies and build the book that would carry everything forward. She just didn't have the energy. She was overwhelmed, she was sad, and she was in no condition to sell Medicare. Murder can be a huge complication when it comes to life insurance. At the very, very best, a murder will seriously delay the payment of insurance proceeds. I tell you this because the state suggests that what caused this murder was this intense, acute financial ruin that was raining down on the Brophies at the time of Dan's death. I think the evidence will show, and certainly our forensic accountant will suggest to you, that by June of 2018, that simply wasn't true. By June of 2018, the Brophies were in pretty good financial shape, and as of June 2nd, they probably, between both of their accounts, could have put their hands on $10,000 cash if they needed to. But as I said, murder can be a complicating process. Ms. Brophy, especially as she talked to different insurance companies, told her friends it would probably be years before these claims were resolved. The state makes much about a call that Ms. Brophy made on June 6th, I believe. What you'll learn during trial is that after she had talked with the police urged her to talk to someone who was what they called a tips counselor. The tips counselor gave Ms. Brophy a book, and at the back of the book was a little checklist about what to do in a time like this. One of the things on the checklist, in addition to finding a will, was to try to figure out exactly which insurance policies you had and to begin the process. And as I say, it was never going to be too soon to begin the process, because when someone's murdered, what we know is that the process can take a long, long time. Dan's sudden death created other problems with the life insurance too. Do you remember that very expensive return of premium policy that Dan bought, betting Dan that would live to be age 78? The one she paid 3 times or 6 times the premiums for? Well, that lost a huge part of its value because Dan Brophy died too young. Remember the $250,000 policy she bought in November of 2016? Well, that was still within the contestability period. In the Dearest Dan letter, Nancy Brophy talks about a guy named Schneider. I've always forgotten his name, but she says, you know, when I saw him, I worried about you. Well, what had happened with Mr. Schneider is that he had purchased a life insurance policy on his life and his wife's life. And then Ms. Brophy, shortly before she wrote the Dearest Dan letter to her husband, Mr. Schneider had called and explained that his wife had died within the 2-year contestability period, and that he was having a heck of a time in his fight with the insurance company to get them to pay the claim. If Dan Brophy had died on November 6th of 2018, just 5 months after the day he did die, this would have been a much easier insurance claim to make. While Dan Brophy was alive, Nancy Brophy had a great listener, a wonderful lover, a consummate chef, and an entertaining travel partner. Most of all, she had an all-around best friend. She shared her life with a man who never failed to make her laugh. Nancy Brophy was blessed with a true partner who always looked out for her and always looked forward to a future with her, as she did him. After you've heard all the evidence in this case, we are certain that you will understand that Nancy Brophy did not kill her husband. Thank you.
All right, we're going to take our lunch break, which is typically an hour and a half. So we'll plan to go back on the record at, I guess it would be 10 till 2. But Ms. Liu will give you some instructions on when to be back here at the actual jury room. But with that, we'll take our lunch recess.